Hey everyone, hope you're doing well, and I'm so glad you've decided to join us again. Tonight, we are exploring how they actually used public baths in ancient Rome. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you genuinely enjoy our nighttime stories, let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so fascinating to see who's joining us from around the globe. Now it's time to dim the lights and relax as we start our story. The morning light filtered through the high windows of the baths of Caracalla, casting long shadows across the marble floors that had been swept and mopped since before dawn by the balneari. The bath attendants, whose careful work ensured that each surface gleamed with the proper mixture of olive oil and fine sand that had been applied in slow, methodical circles. The marble itself, quarried from distant Carrara, bore the subtle veining that Romans had come to associate with cleanliness and prosperity, though few visitors gave thought to the months of labor required to transport each block down mountain paths and across the Mediterranean, where ships loaded with stone had traveled routes mapped and recorded by the Praefectus Fabrum, the chief engineer, whose detailed scrolls documented every measurement and specification. The process of entering the baths began not with the bathing itself, but with the careful removal and storage of clothing in the apodyterium, a changing room where wooden pegs lined the walls in rows that had been measured and installed according to regulations established by the aediles, the magistrates responsible for public buildings. Each peg was carved from oak that had been seasoned for no fewer than 2 years, then treated with beeswax applied in 3 separate coats, with each coat allowed to dry for a full day before the application of the next. The spacing between pegs had been determined through extensive consultation between the architects and the Collegium Balneariorum, the Guild of Bath Workers, who had submitted written recommendations regarding the optimal distance needed to prevent garments from touching one another, while still allowing efficient use of wall space. Bathers would hand their folded tunics and togas to the capsari, the attendants responsible for clothing storage, who had developed an intricate system of wooden tokens carved with symbols that corresponded to specific storage areas. These tokens, each no larger than a man's thumb, were fashioned from boxwood that had been imported from Corsica, where the trees grew slowly in rocky soil that gave the wood its particular density and resistance to cracking. The symbols themselves had evolved over decades of use, beginning with simple geometric shapes, but gradually becoming more elaborate, as the need arose to distinguish between the belongings of different social classes and occupations. The capsari would examine each garment carefully, noting the quality of the wool or linen, the presence of purple stripes that indicated senatorial rank, or the particular weave that marked a toga as belonging to someone engaged in commerce rather than government service. This examination served not merely to ensure proper care, but to determine the appropriate storage location, as tunics made from fine Egyptian linen required different handling than those woven from coarser wool produced in Gaul. The linen garments were folded using a technique that minimized creasing, with each fold made parallel to the weave of the fabric, while woolen items were rolled rather than folded, then placed in cedar boxes that had been lined with lavender sachets to prevent moth damage. Once properly undressed, bathers would proceed to the tepidarium, the warm room that served as a transitional space between the cooler changing areas and the intense heat of the caldarium. The temperature in the tepidarium was maintained through a complex system of hypercausts, underground channels that carried heated air from furnaces, tended by slaves whose entire days were spent monitoring the combustion of wood that had been cut to specific lengths and dried according to standards established by the Praefectus Annonae, the official responsible for the city's supply systems. The wood itself came from carefully managed forests outside Rome, where trees were marked for harvesting according to a rotation system that ensured a steady supply while preventing deforestation. Oak trees destined for bath furnaces were cut in winter, when the sap ran lowest, then split into logs of uniform diameter, using iron wedges that had been forged in workshops licensed by the state. Each log was then seasoned for a minimum of 18 months in covered storage areas, where the wood was turned monthly to ensure even drying, a process overseen by the lignari, the wood merchants whose guild maintained detailed records of inventory, pricing, and quality standards. The furnace slaves, working in shifts that began before dawn and extended well past sunset, would feed these carefully prepared logs into the prefurnium, the main heating chamber, following procedures that had been refined through generations of experience. The wood was arranged in precise patterns that allowed for optimal airflow, with smaller pieces of kindling placed at specific intervals to maintain consistent combustion. The slaves responsible for this work carried bronze tools designed specifically for manipulating burning wood without disturbing the careful arrangement of logs, and they wore leather aprons that had been treated with alum to provide protection from sparks and intense heat. The heated air produced by these furnaces traveled through the hypocaust system, which consisted of brick channels built into the walls and floors of the bath buildings. These channels, known as tubuli, were constructed using bricks of standardized size that had been manufactured in kilns located along the Tiber River, where clay deposits provided the raw material for an industry that employed hundreds of workers. The bricks themselves were formed using wooden molds that ensured uniformity of size and shape, then fired at temperatures that were carefully controlled through the positioning of fuel and the manipulation of air vents built into the kiln structures. Installation of the hypocaust system required the work of specialized craftsmen known as the hypocaustari, who possessed knowledge passed down through family lines regarding the proper spacing of channels, the optimal height for air passages, and the techniques needed to ensure that heated air would flow evenly throughout a building. These craftsmen worked with plumb lines and measuring rods made from seasoned cedar, tools that were checked regularly for accuracy against bronze standards maintained by the guild and verified annually by inspectors appointed by the urban praetor. In the tepidarium, bathers would begin the gradual process of acclimatization to higher temperatures, often spending considerable time seated on marble benches that had been positioned to take advantage of the warm air flowing from the hypocaust vents. These benches, carved from single blocks of pentelic marble, were supported by legs that had been shaped according to traditional proportions established by Greek sculptors centuries earlier, though Roman craftsmen had modified the designs to accommodate the specific needs of bath users who might remain seated for extended periods. The surface of each bench was polished using progressively finer grades of pumice stone, beginning with coarse material imported from volcanic regions near Naples, then proceeding through several intermediate grades, before finishing with powder so fine that it felt like silk when rubbed between the fingers. This polishing process, carried out by specialized stone workers known as marmorari, required days of patient work for each piece, with the craftsman using circular motions that gradually eliminated any surface irregularities, while creating the smooth finish that would be comfortable against bare skin. Attendants in the tepidarium offered services that included the application of oils and the gentle manipulation of muscles that had begun to relax in the warming air. These attendants, known as unctors, carried bronze vessels filled with olive oil that had been selected specifically for bathing use, oil that was lighter and more refined than that used for cooking or lamp fuel. The oil came from groves in Hispania Baetica, where olive trees grew in soil that produced fruit with particularly desirable characteristics for bathing applications. The process of selecting and preparing bathing oil involved multiple stages of refinement, beginning with the pressing of olives that had been harvested at precisely the right stage of ripeness. The fruit was transported from grove to press in wicker baskets that allowed air circulation while preventing bruising, and the pressing itself was accomplished using stone weights operated by systems of wooden levers that applied pressure gradually to avoid crushing the olive pits, which would have imparted a bitter flavor to the oil. After pressing, the oil was stored in large ceramic vessels known as dolia, which were buried partially in the ground to maintain consistent temperature. These vessels, manufactured in workshops near the olive groves, were shaped from clay that had been mixed with chopped straw to prevent cracking during the firing process. The interior surfaces were lined with a mixture of beeswax and pine resin that sealed the porous ceramic while imparting a subtle fragrance that was considered beneficial for bathing oils. Before being transported to Rome, the oil underwent a process of clarification that removed sediments and water through careful decanting and the use of fine linen filters. The filtering cloths were woven specifically for this purpose, using flax that had been grown in the Polk Valley, and processed according to techniques that produced fabric with a weave tight enough to trap particles while allowing the oil to flow freely. These cloths were washed after each use in hot water mixed with fuller's earth, then dried and inspected for any damage that might compromise their filtering effectiveness. Transportation of the oil to Rome involved a complex logistics system that included sea transport in amphorae, designed specifically for liquid cargo, followed by overland movement, using ox-drawn carts equipped with suspension systems that minimized jostling during the journey over stone-paved roads. The amphorae themselves represented a marvel of practical engineering, with shapes that had evolved over centuries to optimize storage capacity while providing secure closure and easy handling. Each amphora was marked with inscriptions that identified its contents, origin, and date of manufacture, information that was recorded in shipping manifests maintained by merchants and verified by customs officials at various points along the trade routes. The oil used by the unctors was stored in smaller bronze vessels that were refilled daily from larger containers kept in storage rooms adjacent to the bathing areas. These storage rooms, maintained at constant temperature through their connection to the hypercaust system, contained hundreds of amphorae arranged in wooden racks that held each vessel at a slight angle to facilitate pouring while preventing sediment from being disturbed. The bronze vessels carried by the attendants were cleaned each evening using a mixture of sand and vinegar, then rinsed with warm water and dried with linen cloths before being refilled for the following day's use. Application of the oil involved techniques that the unctors had learned through years of apprenticeship under experienced practitioners. The oil was warmed by holding the bronze vessels near the hypercaust vents, then applied to the bather's skin, using movements that began at the extremities and worked toward the center of the body. This pattern of application was believed to assist the body's natural processes while ensuring even coverage that would facilitate the removal of dirt and dead skin that would occur in the subsequent bathing stages. The unctors carried bronze implements known as strigils, curved tools used to scrape oil and accumulated debris from the skin. These strigils were manufactured by specialized craftsmen, who shaped them from bronze sheets that had been heated and worked using techniques that produced the precise curvature needed for effective use without causing discomfort to the bather. The bronze itself was an alloy of copper and tin that had been mixed in proportions determined through generations of experimentation, proportions that produced metal with the right combination of flexibility and durability for this specific application. Each strigil was finished with a handle wrapped in leather strips that provided a secure grip even when wet with oil and perspiration. The leather came from cattle raised in regions beyond the Alps, where the climate and pasture conditions produced hides with particular qualities of strength and flexibility. These hides were processed using techniques that involved soaking in solutions of oak bark, stretching on wooden frames and treatment with oils that prevented cracking while maintaining the suppleness needed for comfortable handling. The scraping process itself followed established patterns that ensured thorough cleaning while avoiding irritation to the skin. The unctors would begin with the arms, using long smooth strokes that followed the natural contours of the muscles, then proceed to the torso and legs using similar techniques adapted to the different areas of the body. The accumulated mixture of oil, perspiration and debris was collected on the curved surface of the strigil, then periodically removed by wiping the implement on cloths that were washed and replaced regularly throughout the day. After the preliminary cleaning in the tepidarium, bathers would proceed to the coldarium, the hot room where temperatures often exceeded what many modern visitors might find comfortable. The intense heat was maintained through direct connection to the main furnaces, with hypercaust channels running directly beneath the floor that was often too hot to walk upon with bare feet. For this reason, the coldarium floors were equipped with wooden platforms that elevated bathers above the heated stone while allowing air circulation that prevented the wood from becoming damaged by the extreme temperatures. These wooden platforms, known as solea, were constructed from cedar planks that had been selected for their resistance to warping and their pleasant aromatic properties when heated. The cedar came from forests in the Lebanon mountains, where trees grew slowly in rocky soil that produced wood with tight grain and high resin content. The planks were cut to standard lengths and widths, then seasoned for several years before being shipped to Rome, where specialized carpenters shaped them into the platforms used in the coldarium. Assembly of the solea required techniques that accommodated the expansion and contraction that would occur as the wood heated and cooled throughout each day. The carpenters used bronze fittings that allowed for movement while maintaining structural integrity, and they treated the wood surfaces with oils that prevented cracking while enhancing the natural properties that made cedar suitable for use in high-temperature environments. The platforms were supported by bronze legs that elevated them precisely the right distance above the floor to provide protection for bathers' feet while allowing heated air to circulate freely. In the coldarium, bathers would often spend extended periods allowing the intense heat to penetrate deeply into their muscles and organs, a process that was believed to provide numerous health benefits according to medical theories that had developed over centuries of observation and practice. The heat caused profuse perspiration that was considered essential for the removal of harmful substances from the body, and bathers would often remain in the coldarium until they had achieved the level of sweating that they believed necessary for their individual health needs. The walls of the coldarium were lined with marble that had been selected not only for its beauty but for its ability to withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking. This marble, quarried from deposits in Asia Minor, possessed particular characteristics of density and crystal structure that made it suitable for use in high-temperature environments. The quarrying process involved techniques that had been developed specifically for extracting large blocks without internal flaws that might lead to failure when subjected to thermal stress. Transportation of the marble from quarry to building site required the construction of special roads, and the use of equipment designed specifically for moving blocks that often weighed several tons. The blocks were shaped roughly at the quarry site to reduce weight, then finished by skilled craftsmen in Rome who possessed the tools and knowledge needed to create the precisely fitted surfaces required for construction. These craftsmen, known as quadratari, worked with bronze chisels and wooden mallets, using techniques that had been passed down through generations and refined through centuries of experience with different types of stone. Installation of the marble involved the use of bronze clamps and iron dowels that secured each piece to its neighbors while allowing for the slight movement that would occur as the stone expanded and contracted with temperature changes. The joints between pieces were filled with a mortar made from lime that had been produced by burning limestone in kilns that reached temperatures carefully controlled through the management of fuel and airflow. This lime was mixed with sand that had been sieved to remove particles larger than a specified size, creating a mortar that would remain flexible while providing a secure bond between the marble pieces. The coldarium also contained pools of heated water that were maintained at temperatures that required constant attention from the bath attendants. These pools, known as alveoli, were carved from single blocks of marble, or constructed using fitted stone pieces that were sealed with lead joints to prevent leakage. The water for these pools came from aqueducts that brought fresh supplies from sources in the hills surrounding Rome, water that was stored in large reservoirs where it could be heated using systems of bronze pipes that carried hot air from the main furnaces. Heating of the bath water involved complex engineering that included the use of bronze boilers where water was brought to specific temperatures before being distributed to the various pools throughout the building. These boilers, manufactured by specialized craftsmen known as aurauri, were shaped from bronze sheets that had been hammered to create vessels capable of withstanding the pressure and temperature involved in heating large quantities of water. The bronze used for this purpose was alloyed with small amounts of lead that improved its working properties while maintaining the strength needed for the intended application. The boilers were connected to the furnaces through systems of bronze pipes that carried heated air through chambers surrounding the water containers, allowing precise control of temperature without direct contact between fire and water that might cause rapid boiling or damage to the equipment. These heating systems were operated by slaves who had been trained in the specific techniques needed to maintain optimal temperatures throughout the day. Techniques that involved careful monitoring of fuel consumption, airflow, and water levels in the various components of the system. Water quality was maintained through regular cleaning of the pools and replacement of water according to schedules that had been established through experience with the rate at which bathing activities affected the cleanliness of the supply. The pools were drained using bronze fittings that allowed complete removal of used water, which was directed through drainage systems that carried it away from the building to prevent accumulation that might create unsanitary conditions. Fresh water was introduced through separate systems that ensured a constant supply of clean liquid for bathing purposes.
The drainage systems themselves represented sophisticated engineering that included the use of lead pipes shaped to specific dimensions that would provide adequate flow capacity while fitting within the structural constraints of the building. These pipes were manufactured by craftsmen who shaped lead sheets around wooden forms, then sealed the joints using techniques that created watertight connections capable of withstanding the pressure and temperature variations that would occur during normal use. The lead used for this purpose was refined from ore that had been mined in regions of Hispania where deposits provided metal with the purity needed for plumbing applications. After spending time in the intense heat of the coldarium, bathers would proceed to the frigidarium, the cold room where they would immerse themselves in pools of unheated water that provided a dramatic contrast to the temperatures they had just experienced. This transition from hot to cold was considered essential for the complete bathing process, as it was believed to close the pores that had been opened by the heat while providing beneficial effects to the circulation and general health of the bather. The frigidarium pools were filled with water that was kept cool through the use of systems that isolated them from the hypocaust heating while providing circulation that prevented stagnation. These pools were often constructed from marble that had been selected for its ability to remain comfortable to the touch even when the surrounding air was heated. Marble that had been quarried from specific deposits where the stone possessed the thermal properties needed for this application. The surfaces of these pools were polished to the same smooth finish used throughout the bath buildings, using techniques that created surfaces that would be comfortable against bare skin while preventing the accumulation of debris or algae that might affect water quality.
The water used in the frigidarium pools came from the same aqueduct systems that supplied the heated pools, but it was distributed through separate piping that prevented mixing with heated water while ensuring freshness through regular replacement. The distribution systems included bronze valves that allowed precise control of water flow, valves that were manufactured using techniques that produced components capable of reliable operation despite regular exposure to water and the mineral deposits that would accumulate over time. These valves were operated by attendants who followed schedules for water replacement that had been developed through experience with the rate at which bathing activities affected water quality in the unheated pools. Some bathers would alternate between the hot and cold pools several times during their visit, a practice that was believed to provide enhanced health benefits through the repeated stimulation of the body's responses to temperature changes. This alternation required careful timing and attention to individual tolerance, as the shock of moving between extreme temperatures could be uncomfortable or even harmful if not managed properly. Experienced bathers would gradually reduce the time spent in each environment, beginning with longer periods in the moderate temperatures of the tepidarium and ending with brief immersions in the coldest pools of the frigidarium. The floors surrounding the pools were constructed using techniques that provided secure footing even when wet with the water that would inevitably splash from the pools during bathing activities. These floors were made from small pieces of stone known as tesserae, which were fitted together to create mosaic patterns that were both decorative and functional. The tesserae were cut from various types of stone that had been selected for their slip-resistant properties, as well as their appearance, stones that included marble, granite, and colored materials that had been imported from quarries throughout the Mediterranean region. Installation of the mosaic floors required the work of specialized craftsmen known as tessellarii, who possessed the skills needed to create patterns that were both beautiful and practical for use in wet environments. These craftsmen worked with detailed drawings that specified the placement of each piece, drawings that had been created by artists who understood both the aesthetic principles involved in creating pleasing patterns and the practical requirements for floors that would be used by large numbers of bathers each day. The tesserae were set in a bed of mortar that had been specially formulated to provide secure adhesion while allowing slight movement that would prevent cracking as the building settled or expanded with temperature changes. This mortar was made from lime that had been aged for specific periods to achieve optimal working properties, lime that was mixed with sand and crushed pottery that provided additional strength and reduced shrinkage during the curing process. The mixture was prepared in small batches to ensure consistent quality and applied using bronze tools that allowed precise placement of each tesserae according to the planned pattern. Grouting between the tesserae was accomplished using a finer mortar that was worked into the joints using tools designed specifically for this purpose. Tools that allowed the craftsman to create smooth, even surfaces that would not collect debris or become uncomfortable underfoot. The grout was colored using pigments derived from various mineral sources, pigments that had been tested for their ability to maintain their appearance, despite regular exposure to water and the cleaning materials that would be used to maintain the floors. Maintenance of the mosaic floors involved regular cleaning, using brushes made from plant fibers that were stiff enough to remove accumulated debris without damaging the stone surfaces or the grout joints. These brushes were manufactured using techniques that bound the fibers with bronze wire or leather thongs, creating tools that would maintain their effectiveness through repeated use in wet conditions. The cleaning process also included the use of sand and other abrasive materials that helped remove stains and buildup that accumulated despite regular washing with water alone. The lighting in the bath buildings was provided through a combination of natural illumination from windows and openings in the walls and artificial light from oil lamps that burned throughout the hours when natural light was insufficient. The windows were designed to provide adequate illumination while minimizing heat loss, using techniques that included the installation of thin sheets of mica or oiled cloth that allowed light to pass while providing some protection from weather. These materials were replaced regularly as they became clouded or damaged through exposure to the temperature and humidity conditions within the buildings. Oil lamps used in the bath buildings were manufactured specifically for this application, with designs that provided stable flames while minimizing the production of smoke that would be uncomfortable for bathers. These lamps burned olive oil that had been refined to reduce impurities that might cause unpleasant odors or excessive smoke, oil that was supplied through the same procurement systems used for the bathing oils but processed to different specifications appropriate for illumination rather than skin application. The lamps themselves were made from bronze or ceramic materials that had been shaped using techniques that produced vessels capable of containing oil while providing controlled combustion through carefully designed wicks and air passages. Bronze lamps were manufactured by craftsmen who shaped the metal using hammering and casting techniques that created smooth surfaces and precise dimensions, while ceramic lamps were formed using potter's wheels and fired in kilns that reached temperatures carefully controlled to produce the strength and porosity needed for safe oil combustion. Wicks for the oil lamps were made from linen fibers that had been twisted into cords of specific diameter and density, fibers that came from flax plants grown in regions where soil and climate conditions produced material with the burning characteristics needed for lamp use. The preparation of lamp wicks involved careful selection of fibers, twisting techniques that created cords with uniform density, and treatment with oils or other materials that improved their burning properties while reducing the formation of carbon deposits that could interfere with proper combustion. Fuel for the lamps was supplied through systems that included storage facilities where oil was kept in large ceramic vessels similar to those used for bathing oils but designated specifically for illumination purposes. These storage systems included measures to prevent contamination and maintain quality during the periods between delivery and use, measures that involved careful sealing of containers and rotation of supplies to ensure that older oil was used before it could deteriorate. The oil was distributed to individual lamps using bronze vessels equipped with spouts that allowed precise pouring without waste or spillage. Maintenance of the lighting systems involved daily tasks that included cleaning lamp vessels, trimming wicks to optimal length, and refilling oil supplies according to schedules that ensured adequate illumination throughout the operating hours of the bath buildings. These tasks were performed by attendants who had been trained in the specific techniques needed to maintain steady, clean burning flames while minimizing fuel consumption and preventing the accumulation of carbon deposits that could affect performance or create fire hazards. The bath buildings also contained areas designated for various specialized services that were available to bathers who desired treatments beyond the basic bathing process. These areas included rooms where skilled attendants provided massage services using techniques that had been developed through centuries of practice and observation of their effects on health and comfort. The massage oils used for these services were prepared using recipes that combined olive oil with various aromatic substances that were believed to provide specific benefits depending on the needs of individual bathers. Preparation of massage oils involved the careful selection and processing of plant materials that were imported from regions throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, materials that included herbs, spices, and aromatic woods that were processed using techniques designed to extract their essential properties while preserving their beneficial characteristics. These materials were combined with olive oil using methods that ensured proper mixing while maintaining the quality of both the base oil and the added ingredients. The attendants who provided massage services had learned their techniques through apprenticeships that often lasted several years, during which they acquired knowledge of human anatomy, the properties of various oils and treatments, and the manual skills needed to provide effective therapeutic treatments. These attendants, known as alipte, were often highly regarded for their abilities and commanded substantial fees for their services, particularly when they had developed reputations for skill in treating specific conditions or providing particularly effective general health treatments. Massage tables used in these treatment rooms were constructed from wood that had been selected for its strength and stability, wood that was often imported from regions where specific species grew that possessed the characteristics needed for furniture, that would be subjected to regular use and occasional exposure to oils and moisture. These tables were finished using techniques that created smooth surfaces while providing resistance to staining and damage from the oils that would inevitably come into contact with the wood during normal use. The height and proportions of massage tables had been determined through experience with the requirements of different massage techniques and the need to provide comfortable working conditions for the attendants while ensuring proper access to all areas of the bather's body. The tables were often equipped with padding made from materials that provided cushioning while maintaining their shape and cleanliness through repeated exposure to oils and regular cleaning. This padding was covered with leather or cloth that could be easily cleaned or replaced when necessary to maintain sanitary conditions. Some bath complexes included facilities for hair cutting and styling, services that were provided by skilled craftsmen known as tonsors who possessed the tools and knowledge needed to create the various hairstyles that were fashionable among different social classes and occupations. These craftsmen used bronze razors and shears that had been manufactured specifically for personal grooming, tools that were kept sharp through regular maintenance using whetstones and other sharpening materials that were selected for their ability to create and maintain the keen edges needed for effective and safe use. The bronze used for razors and shears was alloyed using techniques that produced metal with the hardness needed to hold a sharp edge while maintaining enough flexibility to prevent brittle fracture during use. The manufacturing process involved careful heating and shaping using techniques that had been developed through generations of experience with metal working, techniques that produced tools with the precise dimensions and edge geometry needed for their intended applications. Sharpening of razors and shears was accomplished using stones that had been quarried from specific geological formations where the natural abrasive properties were optimal for working with bronze tools. These stones were shaped into forms that allowed convenient handling while providing the surface characteristics needed for effective sharpening, and they were often treated with oils that enhanced their cutting action while preventing clogging with metal particles that would be removed during the sharpening process. The tonsors also used various preparations for treating hair and skin, preparations that were made from ingredients that included oils, waxes and aromatic substances that were selected for their beneficial properties as well as their pleasant fragrances. These preparations were mixed according to recipes that had been developed through experimentation and handed down through professional traditions, recipes that specified not only the ingredients but also the methods for combining them to achieve optimal effectiveness and stability. Storage and handling of grooming supplies required careful attention to maintaining quality and preventing contamination that might affect their safety or effectiveness. The supplies were kept in containers made from materials that would not react with the contents while providing protection from light, moisture, and other environmental factors that might cause deterioration. These containers were often made from ceramic materials that had been glazed to create smooth, non-porous surfaces that could be easily cleaned,
and would not absorb odors or other substances that might affect subsequent contents. Some bath facilities included areas where bathers could obtain food and drink, recognition that the bathing process often required several hours, and that people might become hungry or thirsty during their visit. These refreshment areas were equipped with facilities for storing and serving various types of food and beverages that were considered appropriate for consumption in connection with bathing activities. The foods served typically included light items that would not interfere with the bathing process while providing necessary nourishment and energy. Preparation of food in these facilities involved techniques and ingredients that had been selected for their compatibility with the humid, warm environment of the bath buildings while ensuring that the food would remain wholesome and appealing during the time required for service. Storage of food ingredients required careful attention to preventing spoilage in the warm conditions that were necessary for the operation of the bathing facilities, attention that included the use of preservation techniques and storage methods that had been developed specifically for use in these environments. The serving of food and beverages was accomplished using vessels and utensils that had been designed for use in the bath environment, vessels that could be easily cleaned and would not be damaged by exposure to the humidity and temperature conditions that were present throughout the buildings. These serving implements were often made from bronze or ceramic materials that possessed the durability and cleanliness characteristics needed for food service in the specialized environment of the public baths. Water for drinking was supplied through systems that ensured freshness and quality while providing convenient access for bathers who might need hydration during their visit. This drinking water was typically supplied through separate systems from those used for bathing, systems that included filtration and storage methods designed to maintain the highest standards of purity and taste. The distribution of drinking water involved the use of bronze vessels and serving implements that were maintained according to strict standards of cleanliness and replaced regularly, to prevent any accumulation of deposits or contamination that might affect water quality. The overall operation of the bath complexes required the coordination of numerous activities and the management of supplies, personnel, and facilities according to schedules and procedures that had been developed through decades of experience with the requirements of providing bathing services to large numbers of people each day. This coordination involved the work of administrators who possessed knowledge of logistics, finance, and personnel management, as well as understanding of the technical requirements involved in maintaining the various systems that made the baths function effectively. Record keeping for bath operations involved the maintenance of detailed accounts that documented the consumption of supplies, the performance of maintenance activities, and the financial transactions involved in daily operations. These records were kept using writing materials and techniques that ensured their preservation and accuracy while providing the information needed for planning and control of the various activities required to maintain the facilities in proper operating condition. The writing materials used for record keeping included papyrus and parchment that had been prepared according to standards that ensured durability and readability, while providing suitable surfaces for the inks and writing implements that were used by the clerks responsible for maintaining the various accounts and records. The preparation of writing materials involved processes that had been refined through centuries of use, processes that produced materials with the characteristics needed for creating permanent records that could be consulted and referenced as needed for administrative purposes. Inks used for record keeping were prepared from ingredients that provided good flow characteristics while creating marks that would remain legible despite age and exposure to the environmental conditions present in the administrative areas of the bath complexes. These inks were typically made from carbon materials such as soot or charcoal that had been mixed with binding agents that allowed the creation of smooth, even lines while preventing smudging or fading that might render the records illegible after periods of storage. Writing implements included bronze styluses and reed pens that had been prepared according to techniques that produced tools suitable for creating the various types of marks and characters needed for different types of records and accounts. The styluses were shaped to provide comfortable handling while creating consistent line widths and depths, while the reed pens were cut and shaped to provide the flexibility needed for creating the flowing characters used in cursive writing while maintaining durability through repeated use. The administrative offices associated with the bath complexes were equipped with furniture and storage systems that provided organized space for the records and materials needed for daily operations while ensuring easy access to information when needed for decision-making or reference purposes. This furniture was constructed using techniques and materials that provided durability while creating working environments that were suitable for the detailed work involved in maintaining accurate records and accounts. Storage of records involved the use of systems that protected the materials from damage while providing organized access according to various classification schemes that allowed rapid location of specific information when needed. These storage systems often included wooden cabinets and shelving that had been constructed specifically for holding papyrus rolls and bound volumes. Constructed using techniques that prevented damage to the stored materials while providing protection from moisture, insects, and other potential sources of deterioration. The daily routine of bath operations began before dawn with the lighting of furnaces and the initial heating of water and air circulation systems, activities that required several hours to bring the various facilities to the temperatures needed for bathing activities. This preliminary heating was accomplished by workers who followed carefully established procedures for fuel loading, airflow adjustment, and temperature monitoring that ensured the systems would reach optimal operating conditions by the time the first bathers arrived. Fuel for the heating systems was prepared and stored according to procedures that ensured adequate supplies while maintaining the quality characteristics needed for efficient combustion and proper temperature control. The storage of fuel involved the use of covered areas that protected the wood from moisture while allowing air circulation that prevented the accumulation of conditions that might lead to spontaneous combustion or deterioration that would affect burning characteristics. Loading of fuel into the furnaces followed patterns that had been developed through experience with the burning characteristics of different types of wood and the airflow patterns within the combustion chambers. Patterns that ensured efficient combustion while minimizing the production of smoke or other combustion products that might affect air quality within the bath buildings. The workers responsible for fuel loading possessed knowledge of combustion principles and firing techniques that allowed them to maintain steady heat production throughout the operating day, while minimizing fuel consumption and preventing problems that might interrupt service.
What it was like to spend all day sorted feathers for hats. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the feather warehouse on Milk Street, casting long shadows across the wooden tables, where hundreds of ostrich plumes lay in careful arrangements, each feather having been examined and sorted, according to standards that had been established by the worshipful company of haberdashers, through decades of trade with suppliers in the Cape Colony and the markets of Alexandria. The feathers themselves, ranging in length from 12 inches to nearly 3 feet, displayed the subtle variations in color and texture that would determine their ultimate use in the fashionable hats that adorned the heads of London's prosperous merchants and their wives during the latter years of Queen Victoria's reign. Each morning, the sorting began with the careful unpacking of wooden crates that had arrived from the docks after journeys of several months aboard merchant vessels that had navigated the treacherous waters around the Cape of Good Hope, where ostrich farming had become a substantial industry, supplying the insatiable European demand for decorative plumes. These crates, constructed from seasoned pine and bound with iron straps that had been forged in Birmingham foundries, bore the marks and stamps of customs officials who had inspected their contents according to regulations that governed the importation of luxury goods into the Port of London. The feathers arrived packed in layers of cotton batting that had been produced in the mills of Manchester, cotton that served to protect the delicate barbules from damage during the long sea voyage, while preventing the accumulation of moisture that might cause deterioration, or the growth of mold that could render entire shipments worthless. This cotton batting, though used only for packing, was itself valuable enough to be carefully removed and sold to manufacturers who would process it into thread for use in less expensive textile applications. Martha Whitmore, who had worked in the feather trade for nearly 2 decades, could assess the quality of an ostrich plume with a single glance at its general appearance, though the formal sorting process required detailed examination of characteristics that included the length and uniformity of the barbules, the flexibility of the central shaft, the presence or absence of natural markings that might affect the feather's suitability for dyeing, and the overall condition that would determine whether a particular plume could be sold to the premium millinery trade, or would need to be relegated to less profitable applications. The sorting tables themselves had been constructed specifically for this work, with surfaces of polished oak that had been treated with linseed oil to create a smooth finish that would not catch or damage the delicate feather structures during handling. These tables stood at a height that allowed comfortable working, while providing adequate space for the arrangement of feathers in the various categories that had been established through years of experience with the requirements of different types of hat manufacturing. The height had been determined through consultation with workers who had spent years at this task, consultation that had resulted in dimensions that minimized fatigue while allowing efficient examination of each feather's characteristics. The lighting in the sorting room came primarily from north-facing windows that had been designed to provide even illumination without the direct sunlight that might cause fading or heat damage to the valuable feathers. These windows were equipped with adjustable shutters made from seasoned cedar that allowed precise control of light levels throughout the day, shutters that were operated according to schedules that took into account the changing angle of the sun and the varying requirements for illumination during different phases of the sorting process. On days when natural light was insufficient, oil lamps provided supplementary illumination using whale oil that had been refined to burn with a clean, steady flame that would not produce smoke or odors that might affect the feathers or create uncomfortable working conditions. These lamps were equipped with glass chimneys that had been manufactured in the glassworks of Stourbridge, glass that had been shaped using techniques that produced uniform wall thickness and clarity, while creating forms that directed light efficiently while protecting the flame from drafts that might cause flickering or irregular combustion. The first stage of sorting involved the separation of feathers according to their general size and condition, a process that required careful handling to avoid damage to barbules that might have been loosened during shipping or storage. Each feather was lifted individually, using techniques that supported the central shaft while avoiding pressure on the more delicate outer portions that formed the decorative elements most valued by hat manufacturers. This initial handling often revealed characteristics that were not apparent from visual examination alone, characteristics such as the flexibility of the shaft or the presence of weak points that might affect the feather's durability during the hat-making process. Feathers that met the standards for premium millinery use were placed in wooden trays that had been lined with silk fabric to prevent snagging or other damage during temporary storage. This silk, imported from French manufacturers who specialized in producing fabrics for luxury trade applications, was replaced regularly to ensure that accumulated dust or other contaminants would not affect the feathers during the sorting process. The trays themselves were constructed from cedar wood that had been seasoned for several years to eliminate resin deposits that might stain the feathers while providing the dimensional stability needed for repeated use in the sorting process. The classification of feathers involved numerous criteria that had been established through communication between the feather merchants and the hat manufacturers who formed the primary market for the sorted plumes. These criteria included not only obvious characteristics such as length and general appearance, but also subtle factors such as the density of barbules along the length of the shaft, the natural curl or straightness of the overall plume, and the presence of markings or color variations that might affect the success of dyeing processes that would be applied to create the specific colors demanded by fashion trends. Premium-grade feathers, those destined for the most expensive hats worn by aristocratic customers, were required to meet standards that included minimum lengths, perfect symmetry, and the absence of any flaws that might be visible even under close examination. These feathers were handled with particular care during sorting, using techniques that minimized contact with human hands that might leave oils or other residues that could interfere with subsequent processing. Special tools made from polished bone were often employed for handling these premium feathers, tools that had been shaped and finished to provide secure grip without the risk of staining or damage that might result from direct contact. The bone tools used for handling premium feathers were manufactured from cattle bones that had been obtained from specific suppliers who could guarantee the quality and cleanliness of their materials. These bones were processed using techniques that included boiling in solutions that removed all organic matter while preserving the strength and smooth surface characteristics needed for delicate handling work. The shaping of the tools was accomplished using files and sandstones that created the precise forms needed for different types of handling operations while ensuring that all surfaces were smooth enough to avoid catching or damaging feather barbules. Second-grade feathers, while still suitable for quality millinery applications, might display minor imperfections such as slight asymmetry, small areas where barbules were less dense than optimal, or natural color variations that would limit their suitability for certain dyeing applications. These feathers were sorted into subcategories based on their specific characteristics and the types of hat manufacturing for which they would be most suitable. The sorting process for second-grade feathers was less demanding than that required for premium materials, but still required careful attention to ensure that each feather was properly classified according to its potential applications. The workers responsible for sorting developed remarkable skill in quickly assessing the characteristics of individual feathers, skill that was acquired through months of training and experience with thousands of plumes from various sources and of different qualities. This skill included the ability to detect subtle differences in texture, flexibility, and overall condition that might not be apparent to casual observation, but would affect the performance of the feathers during hat manufacturing processes such as steaming, shaping, and dyeing. Training of new sorting workers involved a systematic process that began with instruction in the basic characteristics that distinguished different grades of feathers, followed by supervised practice with materials of known quality that allowed trainees to develop their assessment skills while receiving feedback on their accuracy. This training process typically required several months of intensive work before new employees could be trusted to make independent sorting decisions on valuable materials, and even experienced workers were subject to regular review of their work to ensure that sorting standards were maintained consistently. The workspace organization for feather sorting required careful attention to preventing mix-ups between different grades and categories of materials, attention that involved the use of clearly marked containers and systematic procedures for moving feathers through the various stages of the sorting process. Each worker was assigned specific responsibilities and work areas that minimized the risk of confusion while ensuring that the sorting process proceeded efficiently through the large quantities of feathers that arrived regularly from overseas suppliers. Quality control measures included regular inspection of sorted feathers by supervisors who possessed extensive experience with the requirements of different hat manufacturing applications. Supervisors who could detect sorting errors that might result in customer complaints or returns that would affect the reputation and profitability of the feather merchant. These inspections involved the examination of samples from each category of sorted feathers, examination that verified that the sorting criteria had been applied correctly, and that the feathers in each category met the standards expected by the customers who would purchase them. The storage of sorted feathers required systems that protected the materials from damage while maintaining organization that allowed efficient fulfillment of customer orders. This storage involved the use of specially designed cabinets and containers that provided protection from dust, moisture, and insect damage while allowing easy access to specific categories of feathers when needed for shipment to hat manufacturers. The storage containers were constructed from materials that would not react with or stain the feathers while providing the structural protection needed for materials that might be stored for extended periods before sale. Cedar wood was favored for feather storage containers because of its natural resistance to insect damage and its pleasant aromatic properties that were believed to provide additional protection against moths and other pests that might be attracted to the organic materials in the feathers. The cedar used for these containers was obtained from suppliers who specialized in providing wood that had been properly seasoned and was free from defects that might affect its protective properties or create conditions that could damage stored feathers. The construction of storage containers involved joinery techniques that created tight-fitting joints without the use of adhesives that might outgas chemicals that could affect the feathers or create odors that would be transferred to the materials during storage. These joints were typically secured using wooden pegs or bronze fittings that provided structural integrity while maintaining the chemical neutrality that was essential for protecting valuable feather materials during extended storage periods.
Humidity control in the storage areas was maintained through the use of materials that naturally absorbed or released moisture in response to changing atmospheric conditions. Materials that included specially prepared charcoal and certain types of clay that had been processed to enhance their moisture-regulating properties. These materials were contained in porous cloth bags that were distributed throughout the storage areas in quantities that had been determined through experience with the specific requirements of feather storage in the London climate. The charcoal used for humidity control was prepared from specific types of wood that had been burned under controlled conditions that created carbon with the porosity and chemical characteristics needed for moisture absorption without the production of residues that might affect stored feathers. This charcoal was prepared in kilns that were operated according to techniques that had been developed specifically for producing materials suitable for use in proximity to valuable organic materials such as feathers and fabrics. Temperature control in the feather storage areas was achieved through building design that included thick walls and carefully positioned windows that minimized temperature fluctuations while providing adequate ventilation to prevent the accumulation of moisture or stagnant air that might create conditions favorable to mold growth or insect infestation. The building materials used in construction had been selected for their thermal properties as well as their resistance to the moisture and organic acids that might be present in air that had been in contact with large quantities of feathers. The ventilation systems included carefully designed openings that allowed air circulation while preventing the entry of dust, rain or insects that might damage stored feathers. These openings were equipped with covers that could be adjusted according to weather conditions and seasonal requirements. Covers that were made from materials that would not deteriorate under exposure to weather while providing the precise control of airflow that was needed to maintain optimal storage conditions. Pest control measures included the use of aromatic woods and herbs that were believed to repel insects that might be attracted to feathers, as well as regular inspection procedures that would detect any signs of insect activity before significant damage could occur. These aromatic materials were selected based on traditional knowledge of their effectiveness against specific types of pests, knowledge that had been accumulated through generations of experience with the storage of organic materials in commercial applications. The herbs used for pest control were obtained from suppliers who specialized in providing materials that had been properly dried and processed to maintain their aromatic properties while ensuring that they were free from contamination that might affect stored feathers. These herbs were typically placed in small cloth bags that were distributed throughout the storage areas in patterns that provided comprehensive coverage while avoiding direct contact with the feathers that might transfer plant materials or strong odors to the valuable plumes. Seasonal variations in feather sorting work were influenced by factors that included the arrival schedules of ships carrying feathers from overseas suppliers, the seasonal patterns of demand from hat manufacturers who produced different styles for different times of year, and the effects of weather on storage conditions and the quality of feathers that had been in storage for extended periods. These variations required flexible scheduling of workers and adjustment of sorting priorities to accommodate the changing requirements of the business throughout the year. The arrival of ships carrying feather shipments was influenced by weather patterns that affected sailing schedules, with larger quantities typically arriving during periods when ocean conditions were favorable for navigation, while smaller quantities might arrive during less favorable seasons when only the most urgent shipments would be transported. This variability in arrival schedules required careful planning of sorting work and storage capacity to accommodate the irregular flow of materials while maintaining the ability to meet customer demands for specific types and quantities of feathers. Demand patterns from hat manufacturers showed seasonal variations that reflected the fashion cycles and social seasons that influenced when different types of hats were worn and purchased. Spring and summer months typically saw increased demand for lighter, more colorful feathers that were used in hats designed for outdoor social activities, while fall and winter months brought demand for darker, more substantial feathers suitable for formal indoor occasions and protection from weather. The dyeing of feathers, while not typically performed in the sorting facilities, was closely connected to the sorting process because the suitability of feathers for different dyeing applications was one of the primary criteria used in classification. Feathers destined for dyeing were sorted according to their natural color, with white and pale feathers being most suitable for bright dyes, while darker feathers were reserved for applications where the natural color would be retained or enhanced rather than completely changed. The assessment of feathers for dyeing suitability required knowledge of how different dye materials would interact with the natural colors and textures of various feathers. Knowledge that was acquired through experience with the results of dyeing operations and communication with the dyers who performed the actual color treatment. This knowledge included understanding of which natural feather colors would accept specific dyes successfully, and which combinations might result in undesirable colors or uneven coverage that would affect the appearance of finished hats. Chemical treatments that might be applied to feathers during processing were also considered during sorting, as some feathers were more suitable than others for treatments that might be used to increase flexibility, improve dye acceptance, or provide protection against deterioration during storage and use. These treatments typically involved solutions that had been developed specifically for use with feathers, solutions that would modify the desired characteristics without damaging the delicate structure that gave feathers their decorative value. The preparation of feathers for shipment to customers involved additional handling that required the same careful techniques used during sorting. Handling that included packaging in materials that would protect the feathers during transportation while presenting them in ways that would allow customers to assess their quality easily upon receipt. This packaging typically involved the use of tissue paper and wooden boxes that had been sized to accommodate specific quantities of feathers without allowing movement that might cause damage during shipping. Tissue paper used for feather packaging was manufactured specifically for this application, with characteristics that included chemical neutrality, that would not affect the feathers during storage, and sufficient strength to provide protection while being thin enough to minimize the bulk of packaged shipments. This paper was typically made from cotton or linen fibers that had been processed using techniques that eliminated chemicals that might react with the organic materials in feathers while creating paper with the smooth surface and appropriate thickness needed for protective packaging. The wooden boxes used for shipping feathers were constructed using techniques similar to those used for storage containers, with attention to creating tight-fitting joints that would protect the contents while avoiding the use of materials that might affect the feathers during transportation. These boxes were typically lined with fabric or paper that provided additional protection while creating a presentation that reflected the quality and value of the contents. Transportation of packaged feathers to customers involved the use of carriers who specialized in handling delicate and valuable materials, carriers who understood the care required to prevent damage during loading, transport, and delivery. These carriers used vehicles and handling equipment that minimized vibration and impact while providing protection from weather and other environmental factors that might affect the feathers during the delivery process. The economic aspects of feather sorting involved considerations that included the cost of labor, the value added through the sorting process, and the relationship between sorting quality and the prices that could be obtained for different grades of feathers. Accurate sorting was essential for maintaining the reputation of the feather merchant and ensuring that customers received materials that met their expectations for quality and suitability for specific applications. Labor costs for feather sorting were influenced by the skill level required for accurate work and the time needed to properly examine and classify each feather according to the established criteria. Experienced sorters could work more quickly while maintaining accuracy, but the training required to develop this skill represented a significant investment that needed to be recovered through the wages paid to skilled workers and the prices charged for sorted feathers. The value added through sorting was reflected in the difference between the price paid for unsorted feathers and the total value of the various grades produced through the sorting process, value that justified the costs of labor, facilities, and equipment required to perform the sorting operation. This value addition was maximized through accurate sorting that ensured that each feather was placed in the highest grade for which it qualified while maintaining the standards that customers expected for each grade. Market conditions affecting feather prices were influenced by factors that included fashion trends, seasonal demand patterns, the availability of feathers from various sources, and competition from alternative materials that might be used in hat manufacturing. These market conditions required constant attention to ensure that sorting operations remained profitable while meeting the quality standards expected by customers. Fashion trends had particularly significant effects on feather demand because changes in hat styles could dramatically affect the types and quantities of feathers needed by manufacturers. Trends toward larger hats might increase demand for long, dramatic feathers, while trends toward smaller, more conservative styles might favor shorter, more subtle plumes. These changes required flexibility in sorting operations and inventory management to accommodate shifting patterns of customer demand. The relationship between feather merchants and hat manufacturers involved ongoing communication about quality requirements, delivery schedules, and pricing that reflected the mutual dependence between these segments of the millinery trade. Hat manufacturers depended on feather merchants to provide consistent supplies of properly sorted materials, while feather merchants depended on hat manufacturers to purchase their products at prices that reflected the value of the sorting and handling services provided. Quality requirements were established through collaboration between merchants and manufacturers, collaboration that ensured that sorting criteria reflected the actual needs of hat production while maintaining standards that could be applied consistently across different shipments and suppliers. These requirements were documented in specifications that served as the basis for both sorting operations and customer agreements regarding the characteristics of different grades of feathers. Delivery schedules were coordinated to ensure that hat manufacturers received feathers when needed for production, while allowing feather merchants to optimize their operations and inventory management. This coordination required planning that took into account the time required for sorting operations, the seasonal patterns of demand, and the irregular arrival schedules of ships carrying feathers from overseas suppliers. Pricing negotiations reflected the various factors that affected the cost and value of feathers, including the quality of materials, the level of sorting required, market conditions, and the quantities involved in specific transactions. These negotiations often involved long-term relationships between merchants and manufacturers that provided stability for both parties while allowing adjustment for changing market conditions. Record-keeping for feather sorting operations involved detailed documentation of the quantities and grades of feathers processed, information that was used for inventory management, cost accounting, and quality control purposes. These records were maintained using ledger books and filing systems that provided organized access to historical information while ensuring accuracy in current operations. The ledger books used for feather records were constructed from high-quality paper that would resist deterioration while providing suitable surfaces for the inks and writing implements used by clerks responsible for maintaining accurate records. These books were bound using techniques that would withstand frequent handling while maintaining the organization needed for easy reference to specific entries and transactions. Inventory records documented the quantities of feathers in each grade and category, information that was updated regularly to reflect sorting operations, sales to customers, and any losses due to deterioration or other factors. These records were essential for managing purchasing decisions, production planning, and customer service while providing the information needed for financial reporting and business planning. Cost accounting records tracked the expenses associated with feather sorting operations, including labor costs, facility expenses, and the allocated costs of purchasing and handling unsorted feathers. This information was used to determine the profitability of different aspects of the business while providing data needed for pricing decisions and operational improvements. Quality control records documented the results of inspections and customer feedback regarding the accuracy of sorting operations. Information that was used to identify areas where improvements might be needed while maintaining documentation that could be referenced in case of disputes or quality issues. These records included details about specific problems, corrective actions taken, and the results of follow-up inspections to verify that improvements had been effective.
How they cleaned doorknobs. In an 1800s hotel, the brass doorknobs throughout the Grand Imperial Hotel required attention twice each day, a task that began before dawn when the housekeeping staff would make their first rounds through the corridors, carrying wooden caddies filled with the specialized cleaning materials that had been prepared according to recipes that the head housekeeper had refined through 15 years of managing the maintenance of one of Boston's most prestigious establishments. Each doorknob, whether made from solid brass that had been cast in foundries outside Birmingham, or plated with brass over iron cores that provided strength while reducing cost, demanded specific techniques that would preserve the lustrous finish while removing the accumulation of tarnish, fingerprints, and the various residues that resulted from constant handling by guests, staff, and visitors. The cleaning process began with the careful examination of each doorknob to assess its condition and determine which of several cleaning approaches would be most appropriate. Examination that required sufficient light to detect the subtle differences between surface dirt that could be removed with gentle cleaning and deeper tarnishing that would require more aggressive treatment. The housekeeping staff carried small oil lamps that provided focused illumination for this examination. Lamps that burned refined whale oil that had been filtered to eliminate impurities that might produce smoke or unpleasant odors in the hotel corridors where guests might be disturbed by cleaning activities conducted during early morning hours. The basic cleaning solution used for daily maintenance of doorknobs consisted of a mixture that included vinegar that had been produced from apple cider that came from orchards in the Connecticut River Valley, vinegar that was aged in oak barrels for periods that allowed the development of the specific acidity levels that were most effective for removing tarnish without damaging the underlying brass. This vinegar was combined with salt that had been obtained from coastal evaporation works in Massachusetts, salt that was ground to a consistency that provided sufficient abrasive action for cleaning while being fine enough to avoid scratching the polished brass surfaces. The preparation of cleaning solutions took place in the hotel's service areas each morning, preparation that involved measuring the ingredients according to proportions that had been determined through extensive experimentation with different combinations and concentrations. The measuring was accomplished using pewter vessels that had been designated specifically for this purpose, vessels that were cleaned thoroughly after each use to prevent contamination that might affect the effectiveness of the cleaning solutions or leave residues that could stain or damage the brass doorknobs. Application of the cleaning solution required the use of soft cloths that had been cut from cotton fabric that was woven specifically for cleaning applications, fabric that possessed the appropriate texture and absorbency characteristics needed for effective cleaning without leaving lint or other residues on the polished brass surfaces. These cloths were prepared by washing them in hot water that contained soap that had been made from rendered animal fats and lye that was produced by leaching wood ashes, soap that removed any sizing or finishing materials that might have been applied during the fabric manufacturing process. The cotton fabric used for cleaning cloths was obtained from mills in Lowell, Massachusetts, where it was woven using techniques that produced material with consistent thread count and surface characteristics that were suitable for cleaning applications. The fabric was purchased in large quantities to ensure consistent quality while obtaining favorable pricing that helped control the costs of hotel operations. The cutting of the fabric into individual cleaning cloths was performed by housekeeping staff during periods when other duties were light, cutting that involved the use of sharp shears to create pieces of uniform size that would provide optimal cleaning effectiveness while minimizing waste of the valuable fabric. The technique for cleaning doorknobs involved a systematic approach that began with the application of the cleaning solution using gentle circular motions that worked the mixture into the surface irregularities where tarnish and accumulated residues were most likely to collect. This initial application was followed by a period of several minutes, during which the chemical action of the vinegar and salt would dissolve the tarnish and loosen the accumulated deposits, a period that allowed the cleaner to proceed to other doorknobs in the same corridor while the cleaning solution performed its work. After the appropriate interval, the cleaner would return to each doorknob and use a clean portion of the cloth to remove the loosened tarnish and cleaning solution. removal that required careful attention to ensure that all residues were eliminated, while avoiding the application of excessive pressure that might damage the brass finish. This removal process often revealed areas where additional cleaning was needed, areas that would receive a second application of cleaning solution, followed by additional rubbing and polishing, to achieve the uniform luster that was expected throughout the hotel. The final step in the doorknob cleaning process involved the application of a protective coating that would help preserve the cleaned brass surface, while providing resistance to future tarnishing and the accumulation of fingerprints and other residues. This protective coating consisted of a mixture of beeswax and turpentine that had been prepared according to a formula that provided the appropriate balance between protection and ease of application, a formula that had been developed through consultation with suppliers who specialized in materials for maintaining brass fixtures in commercial applications. The beeswax used in the protective coating was obtained from beehives that were maintained by suppliers who could guarantee the purity of their products. Suppliers who processed the wax using techniques that removed impurities while preserving the natural characteristics that made beeswax effective for protecting metal surfaces. The processing of beeswax involved melting it at carefully controlled temperatures that eliminated contaminants without destroying the beneficial properties, then filtering it through cloth to remove any remaining particles that might affect its application or protective effectiveness. Turpentine used in the protective coating was distilled from pine resin that was collected from trees in forests throughout New England. Resin that was processed using techniques that produced a solvent with the purity and volatility characteristics needed for dissolving beeswax, while creating a mixture that would dry to leave a protective film on treated surfaces. The distillation process involved heating the resin in copper stills that had been designed specifically for this application, stills that allowed precise control of temperature, while providing efficient separation of the turpentine from other components of the pine resin. The mixing of beeswax and turpentine was accomplished using methods that ensured uniform distribution, while avoiding the introduction of air bubbles or other defects that might affect the appearance or protective properties of the finished coating. This mixing was typically performed in small batches to ensure freshness, while providing quantities that were appropriate for daily use throughout the hotel. The mixing process involved gentle heating of the beeswax to soften it sufficiently for combination with the turpentine, followed by thorough stirring using wooden implements that would not react with the ingredients or introduce contamination. Application of the protective coating required different techniques than those used for the initial cleaning, techniques that involved the use of soft brushes made from animal hair that had been selected for its ability to hold and distribute the wax mixture evenly across the brass surface. These brushes were manufactured specifically for this application, with bristles that were secured in wooden handles, using techniques that prevented shedding, while providing the flexibility needed for effective application of the protective coating. The animal hair used for these brushes came from various sources, including horsehair that was collected from animals that were groomed regularly to ensure the quality and cleanliness of the hair. This hair was processed using techniques that included washing, sorting according to length and texture, and treatment with oils that enhanced its performance in brush applications, while preventing brittleness that might cause breakage during use. The preparation of brush bristles was a specialized craft that required knowledge of hair characteristics and processing techniques that had been developed through generations of experience with brush manufacturing. Wooden handles for the application brushes were turned from hardwood that had been seasoned to eliminate moisture that might cause warping or cracking during use. Hardwood that was selected for its strength and dimensional stability, as well as its resistance to the chemicals that might be encountered during cleaning operations. The turning of brush handles was accomplished using lathes that allowed precise shaping, while creating smooth surfaces that would be comfortable during extended use by housekeeping staff. The securing of bristles in brush handles involved techniques that included drilling holes of specific diameter and depth, inserting the prepared bristles, and using adhesives or mechanical fastening methods that would provide secure attachment, while allowing the bristles to flex naturally during use. These assembly techniques were performed by skilled craftsmen who possessed the knowledge and experience needed to create brushes
that would provide reliable service, while maintaining their effectiveness through repeated use and cleaning. Storage of cleaning supplies required facilities that would preserve the quality of materials, while providing organized access for housekeeping staff who needed to obtain supplies quickly during their daily rounds. The storage areas were located in basement rooms that provided consistent temperature and humidity conditions, while being easily accessible from the main floors of the hotel through service stairways that had been designed to minimize disruption to guest areas during staff activities. The storage containers used for cleaning supplies were constructed from materials that would not react with the stored contents, while providing protection from moisture, dust and other contaminants that might affect the quality or effectiveness of the cleaning materials. These containers included wooden boxes lined with oiled cloth for storing solid materials, such as salt and cotton cloths, ceramic vessels for storing liquid solutions such as vinegar mixtures, and glass bottles for storing volatile materials, such as turpentine, that required containers that would prevent evaporation, while allowing easy dispensing. Wooden storage boxes were constructed using joinery techniques that created tight-fitting joints, without relying on adhesives that might outgas chemicals that could contaminate stored materials. Joints that were secured using wooden pegs or bronze fittings that provided structural integrity while maintaining chemical neutrality. The wood used for these boxes was typically cedar or other aromatic species that provided natural resistance to insect damage, while imparting pleasant odors that would not affect the stored cleaning materials. The oiled cloth used to line storage boxes was prepared by treating cotton fabric with linseed oil that had been boiled to improve its drying characteristics and protective properties. Oil that was applied using techniques that ensured even coverage, while preventing the accumulation of excess material that might transfer to stored items. This oiled cloth provided protection against moisture, while creating smooth surfaces that would not snag or damage stored materials, such as cotton cleaning cloths. Ceramic vessels used for storing liquid cleaning solutions were manufactured from clay that had been fired at temperatures that created non-porous surfaces that would not absorb or react with acidic solutions such as vinegar mixtures. Clay that was shaped using potter's wheels and glazed using materials that provided additional chemical resistance, while creating smooth surfaces that could be easily cleaned. These vessels were equipped with tight-fitting lids that prevented evaporation and contamination, while allowing easy access to stored solutions. Glass bottles used for storing turpentine and other volatile materials were manufactured using techniques that produced uniform wall thickness and chemical resistance, while creating forms that allowed safe handling and precise dispensing of contents. These bottles were typically made from dark-colored glass that provided protection from light that might affect the stored materials, glass that was shaped using molds that ensured consistent dimensions and quality. The daily routine for doorknob cleaning began with the preparation of fresh cleaning solutions and the gathering of clean cloths and application brushes, preparation that took place in the service areas before the cleaning staff began their rounds through the hotel corridors. This preparation included checking the condition of cleaning materials and replacing any items that showed signs of wear or contamination that might affect their effectiveness or create problems during the cleaning process. The sequence of cleaning activities was planned to minimize disruption to hotel guests while ensuring that all doorknobs received appropriate attention according to schedules that had been developed through experience with the patterns of guest activity and the time required for effective cleaning. The cleaning typically began on the upper floors of the hotel during the early morning hours, when guest activity was minimal, then proceeded downward through the building as guest activity increased throughout the day. Record keeping for doorknob maintenance included documentation of which areas had been cleaned, which doorknobs required special attention due to unusual tarnishing or damage, and which cleaning materials had been consumed during each day's activities. These records were maintained using ledger books that provided organized tracking of maintenance activities, while serving as references for planning future work and managing supply inventories. The ledger books used for maintenance records were constructed from high-quality paper that would resist deterioration, while providing suitable writing surfaces for the pens and inks used by housekeeping supervisors responsible for maintaining accurate documentation. These books were bound using techniques that would withstand frequent handling, while maintaining organization that allowed easy reference to specific entries and historical information. Quality control measures for doorknob cleaning included regular inspections by housekeeping supervisors, who would examine the results of cleaning activities and provide feedback to staff regarding areas where improvements might be needed. These inspections involved detailed examination of doorknobs throughout the hotel, using criteria that had been established based on guest expectations and the standards maintained by competing establishments in the Boston hotel market. The criteria used for quality inspections included assessment of the uniformity of brass finish, the absence of tarnish or residue accumulation, the proper application of protective coatings, and the overall appearance that contributed to the impression of quality and attention to detail that guests expected from a premier hotel. These criteria were documented in written standards that provided consistent guidance for both cleaning staff and supervisors responsible for quality control. Training of new housekeeping staff in doorknob cleaning procedures involved systematic instruction in the techniques and materials used for this specialized work, instruction that included both theoretical knowledge of cleaning chemistry and practical experience with the tools and methods used in daily operations. This training was typically conducted by experienced staff members who possessed detailed knowledge of the procedures and could provide guidance in developing the skills needed for effective and efficient cleaning work. The theoretical aspects of training included explanation of how different cleaning materials work to remove tarnish and accumulated residues, knowledge that helped staff understand why specific procedures were important, and how variations in technique might affect results. This theoretical foundation provided the basis for problem solving when unusual conditions were encountered, and helped staff make appropriate decisions about which cleaning approaches would be most effective in different situations. Practical training involved supervised work with actual doorknobs under conditions that allowed trainees to develop their skills while receiving immediate feedback on their technique and results. This hands-on experience was essential for developing the manual dexterity and judgment needed for effective cleaning work, while building familiarity with the tools and materials used in daily operations. Seasonal variations in doorknob cleaning requirements were influenced by factors that included changes in humidity and temperature that affected the rate of tarnish formation, variations in guest activity levels that influenced the frequency of handling and contamination, and the availability of cleaning materials that might be affected by weather conditions or supply chain disruptions. These variations required adjustments to cleaning schedules and procedures to maintain consistent results throughout the year. High humidity conditions, particularly common during summer months in Boston, accelerated the formation of tarnish on brass surfaces, while affecting the performance of cleaning materials and protective coatings. These conditions required more frequent cleaning and the use of modified techniques that accommodated the changed environmental factors while maintaining the quality standards expected by hotel guests. Low humidity conditions during winter months created different challenges that included increased static electricity that could affect the application of cleaning materials and protective coatings, as well as changes in the behavior of organic materials, such as beeswax, that might become harder and more difficult to apply effectively. These conditions required adjustments to material preparation and application techniques to ensure consistent results despite the changed environmental conditions. The procurement of cleaning materials involved relationships with suppliers who could provide consistent quality while meeting the quantities needed for daily operations throughout a large hotel. Relationships that often involved long-term contracts that provided price stability while ensuring reliable delivery schedules. These supplier relationships required ongoing communication about quality requirements, delivery schedules, and pricing that reflected changing market conditions for the various materials used in cleaning operations. Quality requirements for cleaning materials were established through testing and evaluation of products from different suppliers, evaluation that included assessment of cleaning effectiveness, compatibility with brass surfaces, storage stability, and cost considerations that affected the overall economics of hotel operations. These requirements were documented in specifications that served as the basis for supplier agreements and quality control procedures. Delivery schedules for cleaning materials were coordinated with hotel operations to ensure adequate inventory levels, while minimizing storage requirements and reducing the risk of deterioration that might affect material quality. This coordination required planning that took into account seasonal variations in usage, the shelf life of different materials, and the lead times required for procurement from various suppliers. Cost considerations for cleaning materials included not only the direct purchase prices, but also factors such as transportation costs, storage requirements, waste levels during use, and the labor time required for application. These comprehensive cost evaluations were used to make decisions about which materials and suppliers would provide the best overall value for hotel operations, while maintaining the quality standards expected by guests. The economics of doorknob maintenance involved balancing the costs of labor, materials, and equipment against the value provided through maintaining the appearance and functionality that contributed to guest satisfaction and the hotel's reputation for quality. These economic considerations influenced decisions about cleaning frequencies, material selection, and staffing levels, while ensuring that cost control measures did not compromise the standards that were essential for the hotel's competitive position. Labor costs for doorknob cleaning were influenced by the skill levels required for effective work, the time needed to clean each doorknob properly, and the wages necessary to attract and retain qualified housekeeping staff. These costs were managed through training programs that improved efficiency, scheduling systems that optimized staff utilization, and performance standards that ensured productivity while maintaining quality. Material costs were controlled through careful procurement practices, efficient usage procedures, and waste reduction measures that minimized the quantities of cleaning materials consumed while maintaining effectiveness. These cost control measures included training staff in proper application techniques, monitoring material consumption patterns, and working with suppliers to optimize product formulations for specific hotel applications. Equipment costs for doorknob cleaning were relatively modest, but included considerations such as the durability of cleaning cloths and brushes, the replacement schedules for worn items, and the storage facilities needed for maintaining adequate supplies of materials and tools. These costs were managed through selection of high-quality items that provided extended service life, proper care, and maintenance procedures that maximized equipment longevity, and bulk purchasing arrangements that reduced unit costs. The relationship between doorknob maintenance and overall hotel operations involved coordination with other housekeeping activities to ensure efficient use of staff time, while avoiding conflicts between different maintenance tasks that might affect guest comfort or satisfaction. This coordination required scheduling systems that integrated doorknob cleaning with room cleaning, corridor maintenance, and other activities that comprised the comprehensive housekeeping program needed for hotel operations. Guest feedback regarding doorknob cleanliness was collected through various channels that included direct comments, written evaluations, and observations by hotel management staff, who monitored guest reactions to various aspects of hotel services. This feedback was used to assess the effectiveness of cleaning procedures, while identifying areas where improvements might be needed to enhance guest satisfaction and maintain the hotel's reputation for quality and attention to detail.
How they lit candles in a massive church every night. The daily preparation began each afternoon when Brother Francis would retrieve the heavy brass key from its designated hook beside the vestry door, the metal still holding the coolness of morning, despite the warming autumn air that filtered through the thick stone walls of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral. The key itself had been crafted in the workshop of Master Gerard the locksmith some 30 years prior, its surface now worn smooth by countless fingers, the intricate scrollwork along its shaft barely visible beneath decades of handling, though the weight of it remained substantial and reassuring in his palm as he made his way through the shadowed corridors toward the candle storage chamber. The chamber occupied a space beneath the main altar, accessible through a narrow stone stairway that descended 12 steps into the cathedral's foundation, each step worn concave by the passage of generations of monks and clergy who had performed this same ritual countless times before. The walls here were limestone, quarried from the hills 3 leagues to the north, their surface cool and slightly damp to the touch even in the driest months of summer, creating an environment that preserved the candles in their optimal condition, while preventing the wax from becoming too soft or developing the white bloom that indicated improper storage. Brother Francis would pause at the threshold of the chamber, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness before proceeding to the wooden shelving system that Master Thomas the carpenter had constructed according to specifications provided by the cathedral's candle steward nearly 2 decades earlier. The shelves themselves were crafted from oak planks, each measuring precisely 2 cubits in length and 1 span in width, arranged in tiers that rose from floor to ceiling along 3 walls of the chamber, with narrow gaps between each shelf to allow for adequate air circulation around the stored candles. The candles themselves were arranged according to a system that had evolved over many years of refinement and adjustment, beginning with the tallest altar candles on the uppermost shelves, their length requiring them to be stored horizontally to prevent breaking, each candle wrapped individually in linen cloth that had been blessed by the cathedral's dean and stored in wooden troughs lined with sawdust from the abbey's woodworking shop. These altar candles measured 2 full cubits in height and possessed a circumference that required both hands to encompass, their wax a pure white color, achieved through multiple refinements of the beeswax that arrived each spring from the monastery's own apiaries as well as from the beekeepers in the surrounding countryside, who had maintained contracts with the cathedral for the provision of high-quality wax for generations. Below these largest candles were arranged the processional candles, somewhat shorter, but still substantial in their proportions, measuring 1 3/4 cubits in length, with a circumference that could be spanned by a single hand, their wax similarly pure, though occasionally displaying the faintest hint of golden color that indicated the presence of particularly rich honey in the original beeswax. These processional candles required careful handling during removal from storage, as their length made them susceptible to developing hairline fractures if lifted improperly or subjected to sudden temperature changes. The third tier of shelving held the choir candles, each measuring 1 full cubit in length with a circumference of precisely 4 thumb widths, their production overseen by Brother Augustine, who possessed particular expertise in the art of candle making, and who insisted upon specific standards for the wick preparation and wax temperature during the molding process. These choir candles were stored in wooden boxes, lined with lamb's wool, that had been carefully cleaned and combed to remove any lanolin that might affect the candle wax, with each box holding precisely 12 candles arranged in 2 rows of 6, separated by thin wooden dividers that prevented them from touching one another during storage. Brother Francis would begin his selection by examining the altar candles, running his fingers along their length to detect any imperfections in the wax surface or variations in the circumference that might indicate problems with the molding process. The acceptable candles possessed a smooth, even surface with no visible air bubbles or inclusions, their color uniform from base to tip, the wick centered precisely and extending exactly 1 thumb joint beyond the wax at the top, while remaining flush with the base. Any candle that failed to meet these standards would be set aside for use in the smaller chapels, or for practice lighting sessions with the newer acolytes. The process of selecting candles required not only visual inspection, but also gentle pressure testing, to ensure the wax had achieved proper hardness throughout its structure. Brother Francis would press his thumbnail gently into the side of each candle near its base, where any weakness in the molding would first become apparent, looking for wax that yielded too easily under pressure, or that showed signs of cracking or separation. The ideal candle would resist this pressure, while maintaining slight flexibility, indicating that the wax had been heated to precisely the correct temperature during molding, and allowed to cool at the proper rate to achieve optimal density and burn characteristics. Having selected the required candles for the evening's lighting, Brother Francis would arrange them in the carrying basket that Master Simon the basket weaver had crafted specifically for this purpose, its dimensions calculated to accommodate the various sizes of candles while providing adequate support to prevent damage during transport. The basket itself was woven from willow shoots that had been harvested during the previous winter, when the sap was dormant, treated with linseed oil to prevent drying and splitting, and fitted with leather handles that had been sewn by Brother Peter using thread made from sinew and techniques learned during his previous life as a cobbler in the village. The transport of candles from the storage chamber to their designated positions throughout the cathedral required careful planning and coordination, as the sheer number of candles needed for complete illumination during evening services necessitated multiple trips and precise timing to ensure all candles were in position before the service began. The cathedral's lighting system included 47 major candle positions, beginning with the 12 altar candles arranged in 2 rows of 6 flanking the main altar, their holders crafted from brass that had been polished weekly by the acolytes, using a mixture of fine sand and vinegar applied with soft cloths made from worn linen vestments. Each altar candle holder consisted of a circular base, measuring 1 palm in diameter, supporting a hollow cylinder that rose to a height of precisely 6 thumb widths, the interior dimensions carefully calculated to provide a secure fit for the altar candles while allowing sufficient airflow around the base of the flame to prevent the formation of smoke that might discolor the stone walls or disturb the breathing of those participating in the service. The brass itself had been cast in the workshop of Master Baldwin the metal worker, who had learned his techniques from his father and grandfather before him, maintaining traditions of craftsmanship that ensured each holder would provide decades of reliable service. The positioning of altar candles required specific knowledge of wind patterns within the cathedral, as the massive stone structure created subtle air currents that could affect flame stability and burning characteristics. Brother Francis had learned through years of experience that candles placed near the northern wall required positioning slightly forward from their holders to compensate for the draft that entered through the small gaps around the stained glass windows, while those on the southern side could be seated fully within their holders due to the protection provided by the thick buttressing that blocked external air movement. Beyond the altar candles, the cathedral's lighting system included 24 choir candles arranged in 2 rows along the wooden choir stalls, their holders carved from oak and fitted with brass inserts that could be removed for cleaning and maintenance. These choir candles served both practical and ceremonial purposes, providing illumination for the reading of prayers and hymns while creating an atmosphere of reverence and solemnity that enhanced the spiritual experience of evening services. The choir candle holders had been crafted by Brother Marcus during his years as the cathedral's woodworker, each holder individually shaped and fitted to ensure proper alignment and stability. The oak used for these holders came from trees that had been felled in the cathedral's own forests, seasoned for a minimum of 3 years in covered sheds that protected the wood from moisture, while allowing air circulation that prevented the development of rot or insect infestation. The preparation of choir candles required particular attention to wick trimming, as candles used in this location would burn for extended periods during lengthy evening services, and needed to maintain consistent flame height throughout their burning period. Brother Francis would examine each wick carefully, using small brass scissors to trim them to precisely 1/2 of a thumb joint in length, the optimal size for producing a steady flame without excessive flickering or smoking. The process of wick trimming required steady hands and good lighting, as variations of even small amounts could significantly affect burning characteristics. Too long a wick would produce a flame that flickered and smoked, creating distraction during services and potentially leaving soot deposits on the nearby woodwork, while too short a wick might fail to ignite properly, or might extinguish unexpectedly during the service, requiring interruption of the proceedings for relighting. In addition to the altar and choir candles, the cathedral's complete lighting system included 11 processional candles used during ceremonies that involved movement through the nave and transepts, their holders designed to be carried safely while maintaining flame stability during walking. These processional candle holders consisted of brass cylinders similar to those used for altar candles, but fitted with wooden handles wrapped in leather to prevent burns and provide secure grip even when hands might be damp from nervousness or exertion. The processional candles themselves required special preparation, as they would be subjected to air movement and changing positions that could affect their burning characteristics. Brother Francis would select only the finest candles for processional use, examining them for perfect balance,
and even wax distribution that would prevent uneven burning or dripping that might create hazards during the ceremony. Each processional candle holder also included a small metal disc positioned just below the candle to catch any wax drippings that might occur despite the careful selection and preparation process. These discs, crafted by Master Robert the Tinsmith, could be removed and cleaned after each use, preventing the accumulation of old wax that might interfere with proper seating of fresh candles or create unpleasant odors when heated by new flames. The final component of the cathedral's lighting system consisted of numerous smaller candles positioned throughout the nave and transepts to provide general illumination for the congregation during evening services. These utility candles, while less ceremonially significant than the altar and choir candles, required equally careful preparation and positioning to ensure adequate lighting levels without creating fire hazards or excessive smoke that might cause discomfort to those in attendance. Brother Francis would typically begin the lighting process approximately 1 hour before the scheduled service time, starting with the altar candles and working systematically through each section of the cathedral according to a predetermined sequence that had been developed to optimize efficiency while maintaining proper ceremonial protocol. The lighting itself was accomplished using a series of smaller taper candles that had been prepared specifically for this purpose, their wicks treated with a mixture of beeswax and pine resin that ensured reliable ignition and sustained burning during the lighting process. The taper candles were stored in a separate section of the candle chamber, arranged in wooden holders that kept them upright and easily accessible while preventing damage to their delicate wicks. These lighting tapers measured precisely 1 cubit in length with a circumference of 2 thumb widths, their size calculated to provide sufficient burning time to complete the entire lighting sequence while remaining manageable for precise flame positioning during the actual ignition process. Before beginning the lighting sequence, Brother Francis would inspect each taper candle to ensure its wick was properly trimmed and free from any accumulated debris that might prevent reliable ignition. The striking materials for initial ignition consisted of flint and steel kept in a leather pouch that had been blessed for this specific purpose, along with carefully prepared tinder made from dried moss and charred linen, that would catch sparks reliably even in the damp conditions that sometimes prevailed within the stone cathedral. The process of creating the initial flame required patience and steady technique, as the stone walls and floors of the cathedral created an environment that could be challenging for fire starting, particularly during the winter months when moisture levels increased and temperatures dropped significantly below comfortable levels. Brother Francis would position himself in a location protected from drafts, typically near the sacristy door where the thick wooden panels provided shelter from air currents while still allowing easy access to the altar area where lighting would begin. The striking of flint against steel required specific technique to produce sparks of adequate size and temperature to ignite the prepared tinder, involving a sharp downward motion that brought the steel across the flint at precisely the correct angle while maintaining sufficient force to generate the friction necessary for spark production. The tinder itself had been prepared according to methods passed down through generations of cathedral staff, involving the charring of linen cloth in closed containers heated over carefully controlled fires that removed moisture and oils while leaving carbon-rich material that would ignite readily when contacted by hot sparks. Once the initial flame had been established in the tinder, Brother Francis would carefully transfer it to the first lighting taper, holding the taper at a slight angle to allow the flame to climb naturally up the wick while protecting it from air currents that might extinguish it before it became fully established. The transition from tinder to taper candle represented the most delicate phase of the entire lighting process, requiring smooth, deliberate movements and careful attention to wind conditions within the cathedral. With the first taper candle burning steadily, Brother Francis would begin the systematic lighting of the cathedral's candles, starting with the central altar candle and working outward in a pattern that honored both practical considerations and ceremonial traditions that had been established over decades of refinement and adjustment. Each candle required individual attention during lighting, as variations in wick preparation, wax consistency, and environmental conditions could affect ignition success and initial flame stability. The technique for lighting each candle involved bringing the taper flame into contact with the wick at a slight angle, allowing the heat to warm the surrounding wax while the flame transferred to the new wick, then maintaining the taper in position until the new flame became fully established and began burning independently. The timing of this process varied depending on candle size and environmental conditions, but typically required between 10 and 15 seconds of careful attention for each candle to ensure reliable ignition. As each candle was successfully lit, Brother Francis would observe its initial burning characteristics, looking for signs of proper wick trimming and wax quality that would indicate stable, long-term burning throughout the service period. Candles that showed excessive flickering, unusual flame color, or tendency to produce smoke would be extinguished and replaced with alternatives from the prepared supply, as these problems typically worsened over time and could create significant disruption if allowed to continue during actual services. The progression through the cathedral's lighting sequence followed a carefully planned route that minimized walking distance while ensuring that no section remained unlit for extended periods that might create safety concerns or atmospheric imbalance. From the central altar candles, Brother Francis would move to the outer altar positions, then proceed to the choir candles on the northern side of the nave, followed by those on the southern side, before completing the sequence with the utility candles positioned throughout the congregation areas. Each section of the lighting process presented its own particular challenges and considerations, requiring adjustments in technique and timing based on the specific characteristics of that area within the cathedral. The altar area, with its elevated position and proximity to the stone walls, created different air current patterns than the more open spaces of the nave, while the choir section, surrounded by wooden stalls and cushioned seating, absorbed sound and reflected heat in ways that affected both flame behavior and the comfort of those who would later occupy these positions during services. The choir candles, positioned along the wooden stalls where clergy and trained singers would sit during services, required particular attention to flame height and stability, as these individuals would remain in close proximity to the candles for extended periods, and needed consistent non-distracting illumination for reading their prayer books and musical notations. Brother Francis had learned through experience that choir candles burned most effectively when positioned with their flames approximately 1 hand span above the level of the wooden stall surfaces, providing adequate light while minimizing heat transfer to the wood and reducing the risk of accidental contact with clothing or papers. The positioning of choir candles also required consideration of the acoustic properties of the space, as the placement of flames affected air movement patterns that could influence sound quality during singing and spoken prayers. Candles positioned too close to the curved surfaces of the choir stalls could create air currents that interfered with vocal projection, while those placed too far from the singers might fail to provide adequate illumination for reading music and texts during the dimmer periods of evening services. Throughout the lighting process, Brother Francis maintained awareness of the overall progress of flame establishment across the cathedral, observing how the gradual increase in illumination affected the atmosphere and visual character of the space while ensuring that all sections would be adequately lit before the arrival of congregation members and clergy for the evening service. The transformation of the cathedral from its daytime appearance, illuminated primarily by colored light filtering through stained glass windows, to its evening character, lit by the warm, flickering glow of dozens of candles, created a distinctly different spiritual environment that enhanced the contemplative and ceremonial nature of evening worship. The management of lighting timing required careful coordination with other pre-service preparations taking place simultaneously throughout the cathedral, including the arrangement of prayer books and musical texts, the preparation of ceremonial vessels and vestments, and the final cleaning and arrangement of altar furnishings. Brother Francis worked in coordination with Brothers Augustine and Peter, who handled these other preparations, ensuring that all activities were completed in proper sequence without interference or conflict over access to various areas of the cathedral. As the lighting process neared completion, Brother Francis would conduct a final inspection of all lit candles, walking through each section of the cathedral to verify that flames were burning steadily and at appropriate heights, that no candles showed signs of problems that might worsen during the service, and that the overall level and distribution of illumination met the standards required for safe and effective conduct of evening worship. This final inspection also provided an opportunity to make minor adjustments to candle positions or flame heights that might improve the overall lighting quality, or address any issues that had become apparent only after the complete lighting system was operational. The inspection process included careful observation of air movement patterns within the fully lit cathedral, as the heat generated by dozens of burning candles created thermal currents that could affect flame stability and smoke dispersal in ways that were not apparent when only a few candles were burning. Brother Francis would note any areas where flames showed excessive movement, or where smoke appeared to be accumulating, making mental notes for future adjustments to candle positions or ventilation arrangements that might improve conditions during subsequent services. The completion of the lighting process typically occurred approximately 30 minutes before the scheduled beginning of evening services, providing adequate time for any final adjustments while ensuring that candles had achieved stable burning characteristics and that the cathedral had reached thermal equilibrium with the heat generated by the complete lighting system. This timing also allowed for the gradual arrival of congregation members who could appreciate the fully illuminated space and settle into their positions without the distraction of ongoing lighting activities. During the period between completion of lighting and the beginning of services, Brother Francis would remain available near the sacristy to address any problems that might arise with individual candles or to make adjustments requested by the clergy responsible for conducting the service. This standby period also provided an opportunity to observe the performance of any new candles or modified lighting arrangements, gathering experience that would inform future lighting decisions and contribute to the ongoing refinement of the cathedral's illumination systems. The maintenance of lit candles throughout the duration of evening services required ongoing attention to flame characteristics and burning progress, as even the finest candles could develop problems over time, or as environmental conditions changed during the service period. Brother Francis would position himself where he could observe the majority of candles while remaining unobtrusive during the ceremonial proceedings, ready to address any issues that might arise without disrupting the spiritual activities taking place. The most common problems that required attention during services included candles that began to burn unevenly due to minor defects in wax consistency or wick preparation, flames that became too large due to wick elongation during burning, and occasional extinguishing of flames due to unusual air currents or accidental contact. Each of these situations required different responses and techniques for resolution, ranging from simple wick trimming to complete candle replacement, depending on the severity of the problem and the availability of access to the affected candle position. The extinguishing of candles at the conclusion of evening services followed a systematic approach similar to that used for lighting, but in reverse sequence and with attention to safety considerations related to hot wax and metal holders that had been heated during the burning period. Brother Francis would typically begin extinguishing candles in the utility areas of the nave and transepts, working toward the more ceremonially significant altar and choir positions, allowing the most important flames to continue burning until the final moments of the service conclusion. The technique for safe candle extinguishing involved the use of specially designed brass candle snuffers that enclosed the flame completely while preventing the spread of hot wax or the creation of smoke that might be uncomfortable for those still present in the cathedral. These snuffers, crafted by Master Edmund the metalworker, consisted of small bell-shaped chambers fitted to wooden handles of appropriate length to allow safe access to candle flames without risk of burns or accidental contact with hot candle holders. The process of extinguishing each candle required careful positioning of the snuffer to completely enclose the flame while avoiding contact with the hot wax pool that typically formed around the wick during extended burning periods. The snuffer would be held in position for several seconds after flame extinction to ensure complete cooling and to prevent reignition from residual heat in the wick or surrounding wax, then lifted slowly to avoid creating air currents that might affect nearby flames that were still burning. As each candle was extinguished, Brother Francis would examine the remaining wax and wick condition to assess the candle's burning characteristics and determine whether it could be reused for future services, or whether replacement would be necessary. Candles that had burned evenly with minimal dripping and that retained adequate length could be trimmed and stored for use in subsequent services, while those that showed signs of poor burning or structural problems would be set aside for recycling into new candles or for use in less critical applications. The collection and storage of partially used candles required careful handling to prevent damage to the remaining wax while preserving the structural integrity necessary for future use. Each candle would be examined for cracks, uneven surfaces, or other defects that might affect future burning characteristics, with acceptable candles being cleaned of any accumulated debris and stored according to the same systematic arrangements used for new candles in the storage chamber beneath the cathedral. The cleaning of candle holders and related equipment following each lighting session involved the removal of accumulated wax drippings, the polishing of brass surfaces to maintain their reflective properties, and the inspection of all components for signs of wear or damage that might require repair or replacement. This maintenance work, typically performed in the hours following evening services, ensured that all equipment would be ready for use during subsequent lighting sessions while extending the useful life of the valuable metal components that represented significant investment by the cathedral community.